Welcome to another episode of the State of African Agriculture. Today we have Dr. Howarth Bouis. He's the founder and former director of HarvestPlus. HarvestPlus is part of the CGIAR Center, and it leads the global movement to rapidly scale up production and consumption of biofortified staple crops and foods. In 2016, Dr. Bouis received the World Food Prize. In 2018, he was named a nutrition champion by the African Leaders for Nutrition, a joint initiative of the African Development Bank and the African Union to promote high-level engagement and advance the nutrition agenda. He also chairs the Board of Trustees of the Micronutrient Forum. We'll be discussing the story of biofortification and how biofortification can help curb malnutrition today. Dr. Bouis, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I look forward to it.
Oh, it's an honor, actually. So let's start from the very beginning. You were a young research fellow working in the Philippines with IFPRI. You are doing research on understanding how economic factors affect food demand and nutrition outcomes. How did this lead to the concept of biofortification?
Yes, I was actually based in Washington, D.C. with IFPRI, but I was doing research on how economic factors like household income and food prices were affecting the diets of the poor, especially, and then how it affected their health outcomes. And so I interacted a lot with the nutrition community, and they had discovered back in the late 1980s, early 1990s, that the vitamin A supplements had reduced mortality quite markedly. And they were also doing research on iron and zinc, and they were finding that those deficiencies were quite important public health problems as well. And what struck me was that what they were trying to do with supplementation and fortification was address a problem with recurrent expenditures. They were trying to fill a gap that agriculture was not filling. And you would have to keep providing supplementation and commercial fortification at the same cost year after year after year. I'm trained as an economist, and I didn't like the idea that you weren't trying to treat the underlying cause, the fundamental problem. So I worked with the CGIAR system, and of course we've developed high-yielding varieties of staple food crops. We had the Green Revolution, and in South Asia, for example, the poor in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh were eating our modern varieties 3 times a day, lunch, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And I said, what if back when the modern varieties were first developed, what if we had bred more iron and zinc and vitamin A in those varieties to begin with? Then maybe we wouldn't even have the problem today because they were already eating our modern varieties. And what would be nice would be the plants were doing the work. The plants were the ones loading more iron and zinc in the seeds. The plants were the ones synthesizing the vitamin A in the seeds, and you wouldn't have recurrent costs. And you would have a very resilient, permanent solution to the problem. So that was what really motivated me, was the economics of biofortification. And I thought, well, maybe we can make this work. That's a big idea. And so I thought that would be something worthwhile to do with my career if I could make that big idea work. So I started looking into it.
Interesting. So sustainability and saving money.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. For those not aware, Harvest Crop works with vitamin A maize, vitamin A cassava, vitamin A orange sweet potato, zinc wheat, zinc rice, zinc maize, iron bean, and iron pearl millet.
Correct. Very good.
Oh, great. Okay. So how did this actually first start? So when you had this idea, how do you bring it to the CGIAR Center? How were you able to conceptualize the idea and actually make it happen?
Yeah. Well, it was very difficult actually. It took 10 years to raise the funding. I almost gave up a couple of times during the 10 years to raise the funding. So the first thing I had to do was talk to the plant breeders because I didn't know if you could breed for iron, zinc, and vitamin A and still get high yielding varieties. Because if there was a trade-off, if you bred higher yields and if you got higher mineral and vitamin densities and lower yields, the farmers would never adopt the crops. So I visited in 1993, I visited 9 CGIAR research centers to talk to scientists about the possibilities of breeding. And for the most part, the breeders told me it would not work. It was a bad idea. They said, you will probably get a trade-off. And I said, well, then the idea won't work because farmers are not going to adopt low-yielding varieties. But I decided to make one more trip to Cornell University. There's a USDA Agriculture Research Service lab called the Plant, Soil, and Nutrition Laboratory. And they were studying the relationships between minerals in soils and plants and animals and humans. And I thought, oh, here's a place where the people specialize in this. Maybe they'll give me a different answer. So I wasn't really expecting a different answer, but I went there, and sure enough, I met a good friend, Ross Welch, who's now a good friend, and he's a soil scientist, but he had been at this laboratory for many years, and he said, when you load more zinc in a seed, the plant needs the zinc in the seed for the plant's health, and a more zinc dense seed is more vigorous, more viable. You get a higher yield, not a lower yield. And I said, oh. You get higher plant productivity and you get a better nutritious product for humans to eat. So I said, oh, this works. I decided to believe him. And later on, he won an award. He got in the Hall of Fame of the USDA ARS for his work on biofortification. So it turned out he was right. And I decided to believe him, even though I'm an economist and he was a plant scientist, a soil scientist. So I believed him, and he had a close colleague, Robin Graham, in University of Adelaide, who also worked on these issues. And the three of us kind of formed a team to try to push this forward. And so we worked for the next 10 years to get funding. And the plant science donors, they thought this seemed a little strange. We breed for higher yields and higher productivity. We lower poverty. Nutritionists deal with nutrition. Agriculturalists don't deal with nutrition. And the nutrition community was the same. Where donors say we don't give money to agricultural research centers. We fund supplementation, fortification. That's not our business. And so, and also there were issues. The nutrition community said, what about bioavailability? The bioavailability is probably very low. It was the same negative initial perspective that I was getting from the plant breeders. Bioavailability will be very low and it won't do any good to do the breeding. So that's why it took 10 years. And as I say, we almost gave up a couple of times. We got a little bit of funding from the Danish aid agency. We did a few studies, but not enough to actually implement HarvestPlus. We had some funding finally from the Asian Development Bank to work on rice that kept us going at one point when we were about to give up. But the big breakthrough came in 1992, and we were approved as a challenge program of the CGIAR. And then the Gates Foundation had turned us down for funding in 2001. But when we were approved as a challenge program, we came back to them, and in 2003, they gave us our first big grant. They gave us $25 million for 4 years. And we could start doing the breeding and doing the nutrition studies. So that all happened in 2003.
Oh, wow.
And then, we started the breeding, and it took 10 years. It took another 10 years to do the breeding, to get the varieties high yielding, high in minerals and vitamins. They could be then approved for release to farmers. And now it's been another 10 years. Then it takes a long time. Once the varieties are released, it doesn't automatically happen. Farmers don't flood to you and take all your seed. You have to do demonstration plots. You have to explain to people why this is a good idea, and it catches on slowly, but it's caught on now. And so it's a long process. It's been a 30-year story so far, and it's still continuing.
That's a long one, but nothing comes easy. So it's interesting to know for people out there that have been working for over 30 years on this. And now HarvestPlus has released 283 varieties of 11 biofortified climate smart staple crops released in 30 countries. So that's a lot, 30 countries with hundreds more varieties in testing. So that is huge. HarvestPlus has also been able to reach 12.8 million smallholder farming households. So that's approximately 64 million household members growing and eating biofortified crops. So did you think this was even possible or envision that HarvestPlus would grow into a powerhouse championing biofortification?
Yeah. Well, of course, there were times when I didn't think it would happen, but the main thing was nobody could ever tell me why it was a bad idea, why it should not work. And so that always kept me going. And you have your hopes that people will understand it's a good idea, and so they will try your good idea, and the idea will take hold. You correctly quote the numbers of approximately 12 to 13 million households that have adopted, and you multiply by 5 members, and that gives you somewhere between 60 and 70 million consumers. But my own feeling is that these are low numbers still. I mean, I feel the vision is that it will become the standard, that over time all of the research centers will say, okay, we know that we have to have high yields. We always breed for high yields, high productivity. But we should also be breeding as a standard operating procedure. We should be breeding for higher levels of minerals and vitamins. We can't ignore the nutrient content. And I hope that consumers will, in the end, demand the more nutritious staple food crops. I think the best example I can give is the orange maize in Africa. So why should anyone be content to buy white maize? The orange maize will sell for the same price. The reason it sells for the same price is because it's high yielding. There could be a lot of demand, a lot of people demanding it in the shops. The price could go high, but when that happens, the farmers want to grow it because it's high yielding. They'll make a bigger profit, and then there'll be plenty of it around, and the price will come down to the same price as the white maize. So the value proposition to mothers is, if you buy the orange maize for the same price, you protect your family from vitamin A deficiency. You like the taste, so why would you go back and eat white maize? There's no possible rationale for staying with white maize. So that's why I think over time, eventually you should convert all of the maize or most of the maize in Africa over to white maize. And then people will understand it's the same. Why eat white cassava? You should be eating yellow cassava. And we'll also be able to put iron and zinc eventually in addition to the vitamin A. And these problems of deficiencies in these nutrients will be, even if it's not completely solved, it will be greatly reduced. So I'm looking for 1 or 2 or 3 billion people to be eating the biofortified crops, but it's going to take another 10 or 20 years. So you have to stick at it.
Yeah, well, we're getting there. And I like that you talked about, you want it to be the standard instead of you want it to be the norm. So do you think that CGIAR Center can also be, play part of that as well, be part of that and be responsible and make sure that any crop they're breeding is also, they worry about the nutrient content as well. Do you think that will make a
Yes,
big impact?
that's where it really starts. It really starts with the agricultural research scientists. A lot of the varieties being grown in LMICs originally come from breeding programs in the CGIAR. And so it should become a core breeding objective for all of the crops in the CGIAR system. We've developed the techniques to make it as efficient as possible. And we know it's possible. And once you know how to do something, it gets to be easier and easier over time. So the cost won't be prohibitive. And the cost that you spend on the plant breeding is much, much less than the cost that you spent on supplementation and commercial fortification. So that's really what we're fighting for within the CGIAR, is that they make it a core breeding trait. And now we have the evidence. There's really no good argument against it.
Yes.
As long as the incremental funding is available for the bigger breeding programs that are required to maintain progress with yield. The CG has an important role to play in adapting their varieties to the climate change so that they're climate smart crops. They need to continue to increase the yields, but at the same time, they can also increase the nutrient content of these crops. Farmers will adopt them because they're climate smart, because they're high yielding. And we just piggyback on that desire of the farmers to adopt these crops.
Interesting. And then, HarvestPlus already, they developed like 283 or 280 climate smart biofortified staples. So I like that you talked about, the nutrient content and climate smart biofortified crops. So if the CGIAR Center can make that, also a priority, that would be great for not just the farmers, but everybody in a whole. But why does nutrition smart agriculture matter? Would you advise that as the way forward for researchers?
Of course, you have to have a passion, a personal passion. I mean, some people are very passionate about doing something about climate change, and they'll direct their efforts toward climate change. Other people have a passion for nutrition. I have a lot of plant breeder colleagues now that they're so excited. They have so many different projects to increase the nutrient content because they have a passion for it. The one thing about agriculture, however, is that you don't have success in 2 or 3 years, and then you have success, and then you go on to something else. It just doesn't work that way in agriculture. You have to work on something for 20 or 30 years to really have a fundamental success. And plant breeders have that attitude. They know when they go into the plant breeding profession, they know that they have to stick with something 10, 20, 30 years. And if they do that and they're successful, they've really left a legacy that affects millions and millions of people. So I think that's the thing you just have to keep watching out for. And you have to have several strategies for funding so that when one path is going away, another path is coming online.
Yes. So recently, 2018, you were named the nutrition champion by the African Leaders for Nutrition. And this is a joint initiative by the African Development Bank and African Union to promote high-level engagement and advance nutrition agenda. This year, 2022, African Union also declared this as the year of nutrition, and nutrition has suddenly become a priority in our food systems. How can African leaders support biofortified crops to increase adoption rate? What role can they play to increase the adoption rate in Africa?
Well, I think that in terms of investments, especially say the role of the African Development Bank in investments, they can influence the agricultural research institutions to make sure that they're breeding biofortified crops, helping helping the investments in the agricultural research institutions, but also the dissemination. Once the varieties are released, you need some funding to jumpstart the process, to, quote unquote, prime the pump. You need to multiply seed. You need to have demonstration plots. You need to let consumers, if they're orange varieties especially, you need to have consumers taste them. So that's, that all costs money. And of course, that's what the African Development Bank, banks are there for funds for investment. So that's that can be their investment strategies, is to support biofortified crops. The African Union plays a very important role in terms of policies and influencing policies. So government policies, making sure that all the actors along the value chain are supporting the development of biofortified crops, especially and telling consumers that this is something they should be buying and consuming now and looking for in their markets. Consume the orange varieties, don't consume the white varieties. And if all of the government agencies, important government agencies working in agriculture, are aware of and promoting biofortified crops, that's very important. So, of course, the African Union can help influence national policies.
Okay, thank you. I wanted us to also talk about, we're talking about biofortification, but for people that don't know, this is one of the most effective ways to improve micronutrients, but also, people that suffer from hidden hunger due to lack of variety and monotonous diets, especially in Africa. In Africa, we're used to eating the same diet all the time, and this actually leads to the hidden hunger. But also, biofortification can help curb some of these issues. And with this, you can still eat the same crops you're not used to. You don't have to change. Like you can still eat your cassava, maize, and the same thing. But also for people that can't afford healthier diets such as fruits or vegetables. So in terms of making it a priority and the needed investment for Africa, we still have the low level of awareness. And you talk about, investment in the farm, in the research level research, farm level, but also, for consumers. How can we make sure it's easily accessible and readily available? But also, you mentioned something about, creating demand, like the food tasting. How can we make sure we invest in different areas to demand nutritious food or demand biofortified foods?
Yeah. Well, the HarvestPlus team for example, the HarvestPlus team in Nigeria did some very creative things to increase awareness. So every year they hold something called a nutritious food fair, and they move the location to different state capitals around the country. And so for 2 or 3 days, people come to the nutritious food fair. There are booths, there are all sorts of presentations, and they hold national competitions, say for high school students. If they come in teams, they compete at the state level, they win the state, and they compete. They answer questions about nutrition, about biofortification. And it's really fun to watch the students, because they all want to win, and they're very passionate about trying to win the competition. Another thing they did was they approached the movie industry. And they've had a couple of movies come out where biofortified crops are sort of subplots in the movies, and they're discussed in the movies. Maybe the main plot is like not all movies, but a lot of movies, it's a love story. But behind the love story, it's a farming community, and they're arguing about whether to grow biofortified crops or not. So I thought that was really creative. And now champions, movie actors and movie producers are champions. And they show up at the nutritious food fair to promote biofortified crops. So of course that gets on the local news programs because they're there at the nutritious food fair. So there are radio programs. In Uganda, they put on they're like soap operas on the radio. And it's the same idea that they work biofortification into the storyline of the soap operas. And then after a half an hour program, the moderator comes on and they talk about biofortification that was mentioned in the soap operas, and they ask questions, and you can text, it's another competition, you can text your answer, and if you get the right answer and you're selected, at random from all the people who correctly answer the question, you get a prize. But they also have a way, because of the texting, they have a way of seeing where the people are texting from, and they can see who's been listening, which regions people are listening to the programs, and they can have some idea of the types of consumers that they're reaching with their soap operas. So there are I think a lot of very creative ideas going on to increase awareness. But at the same time, all of these activities, there's a little bit of funding involved. And so you have to, you always have to be generating some funding to undertake these activities. But I think that once, for example, the orange and yellow varieties, once you reach a certain critical mass, what if 20% of the country are eating yellow varieties already? The other 80% are quite aware that this is going on, and they say, hey, what's that? Why are you eating that with that color? You should be eating white. Why are you eating yellow? Why are you eating orange? And then then it's explained to them, and at some point it kind of goes viral, I think.
Yeah. And even we have, done some campaign, I think it's in partnership with HarvestPlus and Gain, where we did, it's called Better campaign, meaning this is better, where we're in the markets in Nigeria. But also what we've learned is that in the market, people are curious, they want to know what's happening. And we're working with food vendors to like brand them and talk about the benefits of vitamin A food products. And people generally want to be, they want to eat healthy, they want something better. So it's just also just making it readily available and make sure they are aware of the products in the market. So hopefully, give or take, how many years do you think that biofortification or vitamin A food products will become a norm? Give or take.
When it become a norm, if you want to say that more than 50% of the population is consuming them, that'll take at least 10 years.
Another 10 years. So we
still have at least, yeah.
We still have a lot of work to do.
Yeah. But see, once it becomes the norm, it's there year after year after year after year.
Exactly. It would phase out the regular products.
Exactly. So it's a relatively slow process, but it's a huge impact. It's a slow process, but it's a huge, and it's a permanent impact. It's not something that goes away when you have COVID. It's not something that goes away when it becomes unfashionable. It's there in the system.
And here to stay.
Yeah, exactly.
Talking about COVID, the world has been through a lot of things in the past few years, from the pandemic, climate crisis, and economic issues. We've also had an increase in the number of malnourished people around the world, but specifically in Africa, with the high inflation, the impact of the war, increase in food prices, and people can barely afford nutritious foods. And this comes back to the initial research on how economic factors affect food demands and nutrition outcomes. What are the key, we talked about a couple of things in terms of investment, awareness, policy, and how can support it, but how can biofortified staples help bridge this gap by contributing to nutritious food available in the market? I individually, you personally, people and the stakeholders, how can we do our best to make sure that, it is widely available? It's a critical issue because we need it to be available to help malnutrition and help solve all these micronutrient issues. So how do we make this, come together? What are I say the three key things that are quite important to make this happen?
Yeah, I think it's it's perseverance. You have to persevere. The people working on biofortification, promoting biofortification, they have to understand that they have to persevere and have patience. And they have to, first of all, they have to make sure that the funding continues to flow to the actors that are the agricultural scientists and the people trying to improve the awareness and the demand. So I think that's the overriding thing to make it happen. Yeah, you just keep making it grow each year and making more people aware and making sure that better varieties are coming out. You build these breeding pipelines, and breeders every year, the varieties that they develop each year, they're a little more high yielding, and each year they're a little more nutrient dense. And over time, the ones coming out today replace the ones that were adopted 5 years ago. And you just stick at it. I think that's all you can do. I think that I think it's important that we understand that in the long run, we want everyone to be able to eat more fruits. We want people to eat more vegetables. We want people naturally want to eat more animal products, more fish. They just can't afford them because their incomes are too low and the prices have gone up. So this is something that can really help people while we're on the way to improving people's incomes and they can improve their diets. So you have to explain to people that yes, we want you to eat a more varied diet, but we also understand that you can't afford the varied diet that you want to eat. And so this is make sure you eat biofortified staple foods, not the non-biofortified staple foods. It won't cost you any more money, and you'll get some more vitamin A, iron, and zinc in your diet, which will help your family stay more healthy.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. So the key thing is, funding, awareness, demand creation, policy, and making sure that, increasing people's livelihoods, which is very important. And say, thank you. And on a lighter note, what is your favorite biofortified or vitamin A or zinc? I don't know, biofortified food.
Yeah. Well, I think my favorite has to be the vitamin A maize. First of all, it's the color. If you have an iron and a zinc crop, you don't see it, you don't taste it. It's just so I like the vitamin A because it's a different color, and you're teaching people eat orange because orange means vitamin A, means better nutrition. And I like maize because, of course, it's the most widely eaten food staple in Africa. You'll have the most impact with the most widely eaten crops. And I've just particularly enjoyed working with the group of scientists working on vitamin A maize. They have there's one researcher, a geneticist at Purdue University in the United States, and now he's actually promoting vitamin A orange maize grits in the United States.
Oh, okay. That's
and
different.
you can. So he did the research originally for Africa for HarvestPlus, but he had some varieties that could grow well in the United States. And now you can go on Amazon. If you go on Amazon and you look for orange maize grits, you can order on Amazon and eat orange maize grits wherever Amazon ships its products.
I'll try that actually.
It's a lot of, for me, it's a lot of fun. So, and it's great just working with the different teams and the different crops. It's been a great experience.
Thank you very much. This has been educating, informative rather. Thank you for your time, but most importantly, thank you for your contributions to our food systems in helping curb malnutrition in millions of households around the world. So we really do appreciate your tenacity and perseverance. So thank you so much. And it's an honor to interview you.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about my favorite product, the favorite topic, I mean. And it was great that we had a chance to meet in Des Moines at the World Food Prize. I'm very happy to have this opportunity. Thank you.
Same here. Thank you.